The silent glide of the Mercedes G-Wagon was a whisper within the climate-controlled sanctuary, where Ethan Parker fought to ignore the digital onslaught of messages from his father, Walter, arriving nonstop. The car's dashboard display registered a brutal 95 degrees, a suffocating heat even for a New York City July. The air conditioning blasted at full force, creating a chilling bubble against the sweltering humidity that made pedestrians on the sidewalk seem to warp and shimmer in slow motion, desperately seeking refuge in the shadows cast by the canyons of steel and glass. "We need to discuss your future in the company, immediately." His father's latest message flashed, a stark command on his phone screen. Ethan sighed, dragging a hand through his meticulously styled brown hair. At 28, he was already bone-weary of the crushing weight of expectation that came with the Parker name. Parker Holdings was a titan in Manhattan's cutthroat real estate market, an empire forged over 3 generations of men hell-bent on etching their legacy into the city's iconic skyline. His grandfather had started with a single modest office in the garment district. His father had spun that humble beginning into a multi-billion-dollar dynasty. Now the world expected Ethan to step into those same immense shoes, to expand the family's dominion even further. The problem, the deep, unspoken fissure in his soul, was that Ethan never felt he belonged in that world of ruthless negotiations and soul-crushing black-tie dinners. Since childhood, a quiet, persistent melody inside him yearned for something different, something with more meaning. But these were not thoughts a Parker was permitted to entertain, as his father relentlessly reminded him. The light at the intersection of Park and 57th turned a brilliant red, and Ethan braked smoothly, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the Italian leather steering wheel. That was when an incongruous sight snagged his attention through the tinted glass. On the sidewalk, huddled in front of a dusty old musical instrument shop, 2 small girls stood out against the urban chaos like wildflowers pushing through concrete. The older one, who couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, had fiery auburn hair pulled into a messy braid over her right shoulder. She wore a pale blue dress that, while clean, was clearly threadbare from countless washings. In her small hands, she held what appeared to be an ancient violin, cradling it with an almost sacred reverence. Beside her, even smaller, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4. Her light blonde hair was tied in 2 lopsided pigtails, and she clutched a brown teddy bear that was worn and well-loved, its stuffing peeking from a seam. Her pink dress bore faint water stains, as if it had been recently hand-washed and not quite dried in the humid air. What truly arrested Ethan's attention was the look on their faces. A mixture of desperation and steely resolve radiated from their eyes, an expression utterly out of place on children so young. The younger one, in particular, seemed to be fighting a losing battle against tears, her lower lip trembling as she watched the river of indifferent pedestrians flow past. The light turned green, but Ethan didn't move. Something about the scene resonated with a deep, unsettling chord within him. Where were their parents? Why were 2 children this young alone on a Manhattan street, clutching a violin that looked far too precious to be in such tiny, desperate hands? Ignoring the blast of a horn from the taxi behind him, Ethan flicked his turn signal and pulled his car over to the curb. His father's voice echoed in his head, a constant lecture about the folly of getting involved with strangers on the street, but something about those 2 small, fragile figures prevented him from simply driving on. "Hey, you 2," he called, exiting the car and approaching slowly, careful not to frighten them. "Where are your parents?" The older girl took a protective step forward, instinctively shielding her younger sister. Her large, expressive green eyes appraised him with a startling maturity for her age. "Please, sir," her voice was surprisingly steady, though her small fingers tightened their grip on the violin. "Could you buy our violin? We haven't eaten anything since yesterday, and we're really hungry." As if on cue, the younger girl's stomach let out an audible rumble, causing her to bury her face in her teddy bear in a wave of embarrassment. Ethan felt his heart constrict. The girl's words carried a weight of desperation no child should ever have to bear. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, his voice gentle, noticing the way their fair skin was beginning to flush red under the relentless sun. Since the store opened," the older girl replied, casting a worried look at her sister. "The lady in the store said old violins aren't worth much, but—" Her voice wavered for the first time. "We really need money for food." It was then that Ethan saw it, a detail on the violin that made his own heart skip a beat. Etched into the dark, time-worn wood, almost faded into obscurity, was a small compass rose symbol, the very same symbol he had seen countless times during his own music lessons 20 years ago. The memory slammed into him like a physical blow. "No, no, no, dear. You're holding it as if the violin might attack you any second." Mrs. Eleanor Davies's voice had that tone of patient amusement she always used whenever Ethan fumbled a basic technique. "Your violin is an extension of your body, not a foreign object. Here, watch." A young Ethan, then 8 years old, watched, mesmerized, as his teacher demonstrated the correct posture. Mrs. Davies was different from all the other tutors his parents had hired. She lacked the fawning deference to the Parker name, the rigid formality that defined the etiquette and public speaking lessons he was forced to endure. In her music room, a cozy space in her modest Queens apartment with walls covered in framed sheet music and the constant comforting scent of chamomile tea, Ethan could just be a boy learning to make music. Mrs. Davies had a special talent for making every mistake feel like a necessary step on a journey, not the unforgivable failure his father made every misstep out to be. "See this mark here?" she had asked one day, pointing to the compass rose etched into her own violin. "This instrument belonged to my grandmother. She used to say that music is like a compass. It can guide us through any storm in life." Ethan had traced the mark reverently, feeling the small, smooth ridges under his fingertips. "Is that why you never play another violin?" "Exactly, dear. Some instruments carry more than just music. They carry stories, memories, love." This violin, she had smiled, her eyes shining with something the 8-year-old Ethan couldn't quite grasp. "This violin is part of my story." The voice of the younger girl yanked him back to the present. "Please, sir, we're really hungry." Her blue eyes, identical to Mrs. Davies's, were now brimming with tears. "This violin," Ethan began, his own voice trembling slightly as he crouched to their level. "Your grandmother? Is her name Eleanor Davies?" The two girls exchanged a look of pure astonishment. "You know our grandma?" the older one asked, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "She was my music teacher when I was about your age," Ethan replied, pulling out his phone. After a few moments of swiping through his gallery, he found it, an old digitized photo of a beaming 12-year-old Ethan standing beside Mrs. Davies after his first public recital at a small community hall. "That's Grandma!" the younger girl exclaimed, her eyes wide with recognition of the figure in the photo. "Look, Abby, it's her. Sophie, don't get too close." "I'm the older one," Abby warned, her caution still warring with the apparent connection to her grandmother. A tidal wave of conflicting emotions washed over Ethan. How had he let so many years slip by? How had Mrs. Davies, the woman who taught him so much about music and life, ended up in a situation where her own granddaughters were forced to sell her most cherished possession just to eat? How? "How long has it been since you had a proper meal?" he asked, already getting to his feet and scanning the street for a place to get them food. "Yesterday morning, Mrs. Martinez brought us some bread," Abby said softly, her voice low. "But Grandma hasn't eaten in 2 days. She says she's not hungry, but she's saving whatever little she has for you," Ethan finished, his heart clenching. It was exactly the kind of self-sacrificing thing Mrs. Davies would do. Sophie sniffled, hugging her teddy bear tighter. "Grandma cries at night when she thinks we're sleeping, and she can't give lessons anymore because she's so weak." Ethan looked at the violin in Abby's hands, the instrument that had witnessed so many hours of learning and growth in his own life. The thought that Mrs. Davies's granddaughters were being forced to part with it to survive made him feel a profound shame for the world of luxury that surrounded him. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm. "First, we'll get something to eat. Then, you'll take me to your grandma. This violin, it's worth a lot more than you realize. And I'm not about to let you sell it like this." The girls hesitated, years of warnings about strangers clearly weighing on their young minds. Ethan could almost hear Mrs. Davies's own voice cautioning them about the world's dangers. "Look, I know your grandma told you not to trust strangers, and she's absolutely right," he said, pointing to a family-friendly diner across the street. "So, here's what we'll do. You two stay near the door where everyone can see you while I order the food. Then you show me the way to your house on foot, and I'll follow in my car. Mrs. Martinez can confirm who I am when we get there." Abby and Sophie exchanged a silent, sisterly look. Another soft growl from an empty stomach seemed to seal the deal. "Promise you won't try to take Grandma's violin?" Abby asked, her green eyes fixed on Ethan's with surprising intensity. "I promise," he replied solemnly. "Actually, I promise more than that. I'm going to help you and your grandma." Mrs. Davies, he hesitated, feeling the weight of years of neglect. "She means more to me than you can imagine." As he guided the girls across the street toward the diner, Ethan couldn't help but notice the impressive dignity with which they carried themselves despite their hardship. Abby still held the violin with that reverential care, and Sophie, though clearly exhausted and hungry, walked with her head held high. His phone vibrated again in his pocket, undoubtedly his father, impatient with his lack of response. But for the first time in a long, long time, the expectations of the Parker family seemed utterly irrelevant. The violin in Abby's hands, with its compass rose-etched on the aged wood, seemed to pulse with the memory of countless vital lessons he had forgotten over the years. "Music guides us through any storm," he murmured to himself, repeating Mrs. Davies's words as he watched the two small figures walk ahead of him. In his heart, Ethan knew he was about to embark on a journey that would forever change not only his life, but the lives of everyone involved. What he didn't yet realize was that this chance encounter on a sweltering July afternoon would be only the first chapter of a much larger story about to unfold, a story of second chances, redemption, and the transformative power of love and music. The classic diner on the corner of Charles Street was nearly empty at that hour, the air thick with the comforting scent of coffee and frying bacon. Abby and Sophie devoured their plates of spaghetti as if each bite might be their last. Ethan watched them with a mix of compassion and guilt, wondering how many other meals they had missed. "You can eat more slowly," he said gently, noticing Sophie nearly choke on a piece of bread. "I'm not going to take your plates away, I promise." Abby set her fork down for a moment, blushing slightly. Her grandmother's violin rested carefully on the vinyl seat beside her, guarded like a treasure. "Sorry, Mr. Parker, it's just been so long." "You can just call me Ethan," he interrupted kindly. "And you don't need to apologize. I just don't want you to feel sick." Gesturing to the waitress, he added, "Actually, I'm going to order some things for you to take home. Your grandma needs to eat, too." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "Grandma will be so happy. She always says she's not hungry, but we hear her stomach growling at night." Ethan felt his heart tighten. Opening his wallet, he took out several crisp bills. "Abby," he said, placing the money on the table, "here's $50,000 for the violin." The girl's eyes widened. Abby dropped her fork, which clanged against her plate. $50,000? She stammered. "But the lady in the store said it was too old, that it wasn't worth—" "That lady was trying to cheat you," Ethan explained, a flash of anger rising in him. "This violin is very special. It's an authentic 18th century Stradivarius. But more importantly," he smiled softly, "it's been in your family for generations. It has a sentimental value that can't be measured." Sophie looked at her sister with concern. But Grandma loves this violin so much. And that's why it's going back to her, Ethan assured them. I'm only buying it so that you'll have money for food and medicine. The violin will still be yours. Abby frowned, confused. But if you're giving it back, why pay so much? Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind flooded with memories of all the times Mrs. Davies had been more than just a teacher. Because your grandma taught me so much more than music. She taught me about integrity, about following my heart, lessons I unfortunately took far too long to truly understand. Leaning forward, he continued, Now, tell me more about yourselves. How long have you been living with your grandma? A heavy silence descended on the table. Abby took Sophie's hand, who began to cry softly. 1.5 years, Abby finally answered, her voice trembling. After the accident. What accident? Ethan asked gently, though a cold dread was already forming in his stomach. Mom and Dad, they... Abby swallowed hard, her grip tightening on her sister's hand. It was a rainy day. They were coming back from a performance. Dad played cello in the New York Philharmonic, and Mom was the first violinist. The car skidded, Sophie whispered, tears rolling down her chubby cheeks. Grandma says they became angels. Ethan felt his own eyes sting. Now it all made sense. He finally understood why he hadn't heard from Mrs. Davies in years. She had been busy being the sole safe harbor for her orphaned granddaughters. Grandma sold her apartment in Cambridge to pay the hospital bills, Abby continued. They tried to save Mom, but... Her voice broke. She went to meet Dad in heaven, Sophie finished, hugging her teddy bear tightly. Ethan took a deep breath, fighting to keep his emotions in check. And you've been living with your grandma ever since? Abby nodded. She's the best grandma in the world. Even when there's not enough food, she always tells us bedtime stories. And she tried to keep giving music lessons at home, but she got really tired, Sophie interrupted. Sometimes she falls asleep in the middle of the day and wakes up coughing a lot. Ethan signaled the waitress again, ordering several meals to go. While they waited, he watched the two girls finish their lunch, their spirits visibly lifted by a full stomach and the promise of help for their grandmother. "Where do you live?" he asked when the waitress brought the bags of food. "On Beacon Hill," Abby answered, carefully tucking the money into an inside pocket of her dress. "It's not far from here." They left the diner, the girls carrying the bags of food, while Ethan held the violin. The afternoon sun was still intense, but now a gentle breeze was blowing in from the Charles River. "Grandma's going to be mad we left by ourselves," Sophie mumbled as they walked. "She always says it's dangerous." "But we didn't have a choice," Abby argued. Mrs. Martinez had to go to work, and Grandma could barely get out of bed today. They turned onto a side street lined with old Victorian houses. Ethan knew the area well. Parker Holdings had renovated several properties here, but he never imagined his former teacher was living in one of the few buildings that hadn't been refurbished. The girls stopped in front of a 3-story building that had seen better days. The blue paint was peeling, and several steps leading to the entrance were in desperate need of repair. "We're on the 2nd floor," Abby explained, taking a key that was tied around her neck. "Mrs. Martinez lives below us, and the 3rd floor is empty because the roof leaks." Ethan felt a fresh wave of guilt. His company owned dozens of vacant, pristine properties throughout the city, while Mrs. Davies and her granddaughters lived in such precarious conditions. They climbed the stairs in silence, the old wooden boards groaning under their feet. On the 2nd floor landing, Abby unlocked a door marked 2B with crooked numbers. "Grandma?" she called softly, stepping inside. "We brought food." The apartment was small but impeccably clean. Old sheet music decorated the walls, and a worn upright piano took up most of one side of the living room. The air smelled of chamomile tea, the same scent Ethan remembered from his childhood lessons. "Abby? Sophie?" A weak voice called from the bedroom. "Where were you? I've been so worried." Ethan felt his heart stop at the sound of that voice, more fragile than he remembered, but still carrying the kindness that had defined his childhood. "Grandma, look who we found!" Sophie ran excitedly toward the bedroom. "And we brought food." Ethan paused at the bedroom door, the violin case trembling slightly in his hands. Mrs. Davies was sitting on a narrow bed, propped up against several pillows. Her hair, once a vibrant brown, was now completely white and thin. Her face was gaunt and pale, but her blue eyes, Sophie's eyes, still shone with that special light. "Ethan?" she whispered, her eyes widening in recognition. "Ethan Parker? Hello, Mrs. Davies," he replied, his voice husky. "Sorry it took me so long to visit." The girls started pulling containers of food from the bags, setting them on a small table beside the bed. Mrs. Davies, however, couldn't take her eyes off Ethan or the violin in his hands. "My little ones tried to sell my violin, didn't they?" she asked softly, not a trace of accusation in her voice. "They just wanted to help, Grandma," Abby explained quickly, "and Ethan paid $50,000 for it. Now we can buy your medicine and—" "$50,000?" Mrs. Davies interrupted, shocked. "That's the least I could do," he finished, moving closer to her bed and offering her the violin. "This instrument belongs to your family. I just want to help." Mrs. Davies touched the violin with trembling fingers, tracing the compass rose etched in the wood. A sudden coughing fits hook her frail body, and Ethan watched in alarm as she struggled to catch her breath. "Grandma," Abby Ranto gave a glass of water while Sofiek Limbadonto the bed to hold her grandmother's hand. "I am fine, dears," Mrs. Davies managed to say after a few moments. "I just need to rest a little." Ethan pulled a chair closer to the bed, his expression determined. "Mrs. Davies, we need to talk about your health. Abby and Sophie told me about your cough, about how exhausted you've been. The worries oft will frighten children, she tried to smile, but it was marred by another dry cough. It's nothing serious." Mrs. Martinez said, "You need exams," Sophie Cutin, her blue eyes full of concern. "I heard her talking, and expensive medicine," Abby added, bringing the glass of water. "That's why we wanted to sell the violin." Mrs. Davies took a few sips, her hands trembling. "You shouldn't have to worry about the sea things," she murmured, stroking Sophie's hair. "And now you won't have veto," Ethan declared firmly. "Mrs. Davies, tomorrow I am booking appointments with the best doctors in New York. No discussion, headed when she tried to protest. You took care of me for years, taught me lessons that go far beyond music. Now it's my turn to give back." Ethan, she began, but was cut off by another bout of coughing. When she could speak again, her voice was weaker. "You have your own life, your responsibilities. None of them are more important than this," he insisted. "Please let me help. If not for you, then for the girls." Mrs. Davies looked at her granddaughters, at Abby arranging food on plates, at Sophie still clutching her hand tightly. Tears filled Harry's. "There'll have left," she whispered. After Margaret and John, her voice broke. "I know," Ethan said gently. "Abby told me about the accident. I'm so sorry." A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the clinking of utensils. Abby by prepared the plates. Ethan saw how Mrs. Davies seemed to struggle to keep her ESOPN, the fatigue evidente in every line on her face. "You need to eat and then rest," he said, standing to help Abby with the plates. "We can talk more tomorrow. And don't worry," headed, seeing the concern in Harry. "Yes, I'm not going anywhere. He'll be here when you wake up." Mrs. Davies offered faint smile, allowing the girls to help her settle more comfortably. "You were always special, Ethan Parker," she murmured. "I could see beyond that surname from the start." Ethan sat down, again, watching as Abby and Sophie helped their gra and mother with her dinner. His phone vibrated insistently in his pocket, likely his father, furious that they missed the afternoon meeting. But for the first time in years, the Parker expectations felt insignificant compared to what truly mattered. The violin with the compass rose rested lie in the dresser, its graceful curves catching the last treso, sun that filtered through the window. Somehow that instrument had guided Ethan back home, not at the Parker penthouse on the Upper East Side, but at this small apartment, where love and music were worth more than any fortune. Night fell over the city, and with it came new promises. Ethan knew the conversation. The next day woo eld be difficult. Mrs. Davies would have to be honest about her condition, her worries, her fears. But for now, watching 3 generations of strong women share a simple meal, he allowed himself agency of hope. Music really could guide us through any storm, and this, Ethan silently vowed, would be storm they would face together. Night had fallen over New York, blanketing the small apartment in soft shade Odawas. Abby and Sophie had finally drifted off tossily upon the living room couch, exhausted by the day's emotional turmoil. Ethan covered them with a blanket they found in the closet, smiling at how Sophie still clutched Herded diaper tightly even in sleep. Back in the bedroom, he found Mrs. Davies Moore, alert after eating properly for the first time in days. She was propped up against the pillows, the violin in her lap, her fingers gently stroking the egged wood. "They're amazing, aren't they?" she murmured, her gaze directed toward the living room where her granddaughters slept, so young and already so strong. Just like their grandmother, Ethan replied, sitting in the chair beside Herb. "Mrs. Davies, we need to talk, and this time I want the whole truth." She sighed, a tired sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Always so direct, Ethan. Some things never change. Here yes Methis, and for a moment he saw the strong teacher who had shaped his childhood again. "Where do you want to start?" "From the beginning," he said softly. "What happened after is stopped taking lesson S. How did we interfere?" Mrs. Davies wassilent for a moment, her fingers still tracing the compass Rocio and the violin, life wenten, as it always does. "I taught other students. None as stubborn as you," she smiled briefly. "My daughter married John. He was a wonderful cellist. They built their careers together in the New York Philharmonic. Abby was born first, then Sophie. They were the perfect family." Her voice faltered, and Ethan noticed how her hands trembled slightly. "I had a good apartment in Cambridge near the conservatory where I taught. The girls visited me every weekend. Margaret was always trying to convince me to retire, saying I had worked enough." "But how do you explain that music isn't just work for him? It's life." A dry cough interrupted her, and Ethan quickly offered her the glass of water. After a few sips, she continued. Then came the trainy night. Margaret and John were returning from a performance. The car, the road were slippery. Abby told him about the accident, Ethan said gently. "John died instantly," Mrs. Davies whispered, silent tear scarving paths down her face. "Margaret, she fought for 3 weeks in the hospital. I sold everything I had, my apartment, my savings, even some rare sheet music I decollected over the years. But it wasn't enough." "Why didn't you ask for help?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. "Would have." "Oh dear," she smiled sadly. "You had your own life, and after Margaret," she took a deep breath, "the girls needed stability. I managed to rent this apartment, started giving lessons at home. For a while, it worked. Until you got sick," Ethan finished. "How long have you known?" Mrs. Davies' close. "Here, yes. The first diagnosis was 6 months ago. Lung cancer already advanced. The doctors wanted to start treatment right away, but," she gave a bitter laugh, "health insurance isn't exactly a priority when you can barely afford food." Ethan felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. "How long without treatment?" 3 months, maybe less, she replied with a calmness that frightened him. "That's why the girls were so desperate today. They overheard my conversation with Mrs. Martinez last night. As if summoned, a new coughing fit seized Mrs. Davies, more violent than the earlier ones. Ethan watched in horror as he struggled for breath, dark spots of blood appearing on the handkerchiefs he pressed to Hermith. "That's it," he declared, grabbing his phone. "I McCalling an ambulance, right now." "No," she gripped his arm with surprising strength. "H, the girls. I can't leave them alone. They won't be alone," Ethan promised. "I'll take care of them while you are in the hospital," Ethan, Mrs. Davies began, but he cut her off. "You taught Memorethan music, remember? You taught me about courage, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. Well, this is the right thing. Now I'll pay for the best treatment, the best doctors." The sound of his phone ringing interrupted him, his father, again. This time Ethan answered. "Where on earth are you?" Walter Parker's voice boomed through the phone. "You missed the most important meeting of the year. The investors." "Dad," Ethan cut him off, his voice firm. "With Mrs. Davies, mild music teacher. Theo knew who wasted years of your time with those ridiculous lessons. She's dying." Ethan said simply, "Cancer. And I'm using my trust fund to pay for her treatment." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Walter spoke again, his voice was dangerously controlled. "Have you lost your mind? That money is for strategic investments, not for saving the life of someone who means more to me than any business deal?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm using it for. Ethan Parker, if you do this—" "What? You'll disinherit me?" Ethan gave a humorless laugh. "Fine. At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror now. Inge did the right thing." He hung up, his hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Davies watched him with a mixture of horror and admiration. "Ethan, no, you can't sacrifice your inheritance for him." "I'm not sacrificing anything," he said, already dialing another number. "I am finally honoring everything you taught me." When someone picked up, he continued, "Dr. Peterson, it's Ethan Parker. I need a private ambulance right away and prepare the best suite in the hospital." "Yes, it's an emergency." While he made arrangements, Mrs. Davies looked over their granddaughters still eeping in the living room. "What about them?" She said softly, "I can't leave them." "I told you I'll take care of them," Ethan promised. "I have a vacant apartment in the building next to the hospital. We can move there tomorrow so they can visit you every day, and once you get better." "If we get better," she corrected gently. "When," Ethan insisted. "When you get better, we'll find a better place for all of you to live. Somewhere with proper music studio so you can ante again if you want." Mrs. Davis smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "You've really grown up, Ethan Parker. Your parents might not see it, but I see the wonderful men you've become." The sound of approaching sirens drifted there off the window. Ethan got up and went into the living room, where Abby and Sophie were beginning to stir, awakened by the noise. "Ethan?" Abby mumbled sleepily. "What's happening?" Heck knelt beside the sofa, his heart aching at the fear in the girl's eyes. "Your grandma needs to go to the hospital," he explained gently. "But don't worry, she's going to get the best treatment possible. Andy Outwell will stay with me while she's there." "No," Sophie cried, tears already streaming down her face. "I don't want to be away from Grandma." "And you won't," he promised. "We're moving to an apartment really close to the hospital. You can visit her every day, I promise." Abby, always more pragmatic, held her sister's hand. "It's because of her cough, isn't it? Is Grandma going to be okay?" Ethan looked into Harrius, seeing the same strength he saw in Mrs. Davies. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure of that. But now I need the outward to be very brave, all right? I can help your grandma get ready for the hospital, and then we—" "No," Abby interrupted, standing up. "We'll help. We'll help Grandma." Hannah did, respecting the girls' resolve. Together they turned to the bedroom where Mrs. Davies was already trying to stand. "My little ones," she called, opening her arms. The girls ran to hug her, and for a moment, Ethan saw the full extent of the love that boo, now this small family together. Grandma will have to stay in the hospital for a while, Mrs. Davies explained, kissing each granddaughter on the forehead. But Ethan will take good care of you, I'm sure. And you will be able to visit me all the time. Promise you won't leave us like Mommy and Daddy did, Sophie sobbed. Mrs. Davies closed Harry's for a moment, tears escaping from beneath her lashes. I promise I'll fight with all my strength to stay with you, my loves. The medical team arrived minutes later, efficient and discreet. While they helped Mrs. Davies prepare for transport, Ethan packed a small bag of clothes and personal items. Abby pointed out the violin. Mrs. Davies called as she lay on the stretcher. Ethan, please. Understood immediately, taking the instrument and gently placing it in its case. I'll bring it to the hospital tomorrow, he promised, along with the girls. On the way to the ambulance, his eyes met those of Mrs. Martinez, who had come upstairs to see what was happening. Take a good care of them, the neighbor pleaded, tears in her eyes. With my life, Ethan promised. As the ambulance drove off into the night, its siren silent at Mrs. Davies' request so as not to frighten the girls. Ethan felt the full weight of his promises. His father would surely try to stop him from using the trust fund. The family's lawyers were probably already being called, and there was the matter of the girls' guardianship to resolve. But looking at Abby and Sophie, who watched the ambulance disappear around the corner, their small hands clasped together, Heck knew we would do it all over again. Mrs. Davies had taught him that some things were more important than money or status, family, love, music. Come on, he said softly, holding the violin in one hand and extending the other to the girls. It's getting cold out there. Abby hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. Ethan, she asked in a small voice. Is Grandma going totty? Heck knelt on the sidewalk, looking into the eyes of both girls. Not if I can help it, he promised. Your grandma's strong, and now she has something very important to Evie for. You too, and I promise I'll do everything in my power to help her. Sophie let go of her sister, Shanto Hughem, suddenly. Abby soon followed, and Ethan found himself wrapping both of them in his arms, feeling their small tears soak his shirt. We're a family now, Sophie whispered against his chest. Aren't we? Ethan felt his heart swell withal of he hadn't ever experienced before. Yes, he answered, his voice tight with emotion. We're a family. The violin with the compass rose lay Nitska C, silent but present, a witness to the promise being made thereon he sidewalk. Music really could guide us through any storm, Ethan thought, and this would be storm they would face together there as a family. His phone vibrated again in his pocket, probably more threats from his father. But for the first time in his life, Ethan Parker felt no fear of the future. He had found something more valuable than an inheritance, a purpose. The apartment near Massachusetts General H. Hospital had turned it into a small sanctuary in the last few days. Ethan leaned against the living room doorway, watching Abby hold her grandmother's violin reverently as she tried to play, then owed a soft twinkle, twinkle, little star. Sophie sat on the floor, hugging her trusty teddy bear, her blue eyes locked on her sister with admiration. Almost, Ethan encouraged when Abby missed a note. Remember what your grandma always says? Music is like astry. Each note is a word, and we need to give a chona the time to shine. Abby smiled, adjusting her hold on the violin. It was impressive how, in just 2 weeks, she was already showing so much natural tail, and Grandma was so happy when I played. For Harry's birthday, she said, restarting the melody. Did you see how her yes lit up? And cheerily smiled, Sophie added, swaying to their rhythm. It was the first times Hirali smiled since she went to the hospital. Ethan felt his heart tighten. The latest round of Mrs. Davies' test hadn't brought good news. The cancer was spreading faster than expected, despite the aggressive treatment. But he refused to give up, and more importantly, he refused to let the girls lose hope. Sophie, he called, sitting at the piano he did installed in the apartment. "Why don't you show your sister that piece we've been practicing?" The little one, Saya, sparkled. Sharon to the piano, sitting next to Ethan on the bench. Her tiny hands found the keys with surprising precision for a 4-year-old. 1, 2, 3, Ethan counted softly, and together they began playing a simplified diversion of Fou Release. Sophie still missed some notes, but their enthusiasm made up for Anyan accurate IEs. Abby lowered her violin, watching her sister proudly. "Mom used to play that," she said softly. "Grandma says she played it to help us fall asleep when we were babies." Ethan noticed Sophie's lips tighten slightly at the mention of her mother, her fingers hesitating on the piano keys for a moment. It was in those small gestures that they saw how much the girl still grieved, even as they tried to be strong. "Hey," he called gently, pausing the music. "What do you say we go visit your grandma now? We can bring the instruments and give a Harley Tittle concert. Can it take the drawings he made?" Sophie asked, already jumping off the bench. "Of course you can, little one. I'm sure your grandma will love them." While the girls ran off to their rooms to get her Edie, Ethan checked his phone messages. 15 missed calls from his father in Thel, as 2 hours. Ever since he used part of his trust fund to pay for Mrs. Davies' treatment, Walter Parker had been on Acrosetta to bring his son to his senses. "Ethan?" Abby's voice pulled him back to the present. She stood in her bedroom doorway, holding the violin case. Do you think Grandma is going to get better?" His heart clenched. Abby had always been the more perceptive of Hetwu, picking upon the doctor's hushed expressions and whispered, conversa tians in the hospital corridors. "Come here," he said, sitting down on the couch. Abby approached, and he pulled her onto his lap, something she had only recently begun to all ow. "Your grandma's fighting with all her strength, and we redoing everything we can to help. But the most important thing is that, no matter what happens, you and Sophie will never be alone. Understand?" She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "You promise you won't leave us, even if Grandma—" "Hey, look at me," asked it softly. When the rays met, Ethan saw all the fear and uncertainty shedder yet to hide from her young sister. "I promise with all my heart that I'll always be here for you. We're a family now, remember?" "A family," she repeated, a small smile appearing on her lips. "I'm ready," Sophie announced, bounding into the living room with a folder of olive drawings. She stopped when she saw her sister and Ethan's lap. "I want a hug, too." Soon, Ethan had both girls in his arms, his heart overflowing with love for these little souls who had come into his life unexpectedly. The trip to the hospital was short but always filled with lively chatter. Sophie talked about the pictures she'd drawn, mostly of her grandmother playing the violi and surrounded by hearts and flowers. Abby mentally rehearsed the song she wanted to play, her fingers moving in the airast thou holding the violin. In the hospital room, they found Mrs. Davies paler than usual, though her yes still lit up at the sight of her granddaughters. "My little melodies," she smiled, extending her arms. "Grandma," Sophie ran to Hewer, her drawings fluttering. "Look what I made for you." "And he learned a new piece," Abby announced, already removing the violin from its case. Ethan helped Mrs. Davies sit up more comfortably, noting how each movement seemed to cause her pain, even though she tried to hide it. "Ethan," she whispered while the girls arranged themselves for their mini-concert, "we need to talk about the future." "Not now," he replied gently. Let's enjoy the music first. Abby began playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, each note executed carefully. Mrs. Davies's eyes filled with tears. She hash her mother's gift, she whispered. And Sophie, the same passion for piano that John had. The little concert lasted almost an hour. Sophie showed all her drawings, explaining each detail with the excitement typical of her age. Abby played every piece he had learned, proud of her progress. But Ethan noticed Mrs. Davies growing more tired, her breathing more labored. When a nurse came to check her vitals, Heckna it was time to go, but Haven shown her my last drawing. Sophie protested. We can come back first thing tomorrow, Ethan promised. Your grandma needs tourist now. Mrs. Davies kissed at her granddaughters, holding them a bit more tightly than usual. My little stars, she murmured. How you shine. On the drive back to the apartment, Ethan noticed Abby was unusually quiet. Everything okay? Hasked when Sophie fell asleep in the back seat. Grandma's worse, isn't she? Abby asked in a small voice. Isa how the nurse looked at the machines. Ethan took a deep breath. Your grandma's very sick? Yes. But that doesn't mean we're giving up. And more importantly, he took her small hand. It doesn't mean you have to carry this burden alone, okay? Abby squeezed his hand, nodding silently. When they arrived at the apartment, she helped carry Sophie, who didn't wake up even when placed in bed. Ethan? Abby called when he was leaving the room. Thank you for everything. His heart swelled with love. That's what families do, he answered simply. Later, after the girls were asleep, Ethan sat at the piano, playing softly so as not to wake them. His phone vibrated again. Another message from his father, probably another threat or ultimatum. Tomorrow, he thought, he would have to face Walter Parker and his demands. He would have to defend his choice to prioritize his new family over the Parker empire. It would beat our battle, but looking at Sophie's drawings scattered across the table, hearing Abby's soft breathing through the half. Open bedroom door, Ethan knew it would be worth it. Music really had guided him through the storm, bringing him to where he had always needed to be. The violin with the compass rose rested in its case, silent but present as always, like a promise that no matter what happened, music and love would find a way. Morning arrived with the sound of rain softly tapping against the apartment windows. Ethan was in the kitchen making breakfast for Arthur girls when the doorbell rang. He already knew who it was before opening it. His father was never the kind to wait for an invitation. Walter Parker entered like a contained store his immaculate Italian suit clashing with the apartment's warm simplicity. His cold gaze swept the room, pausing at Sophie's drawings on the fridge and the violin resti on the piano. So this is where the Parker hair has been heating, his voice dripped disapproval. Playing house while you throw your future away. Good morning to you too, Dad, Ethan replied, keeping his voice low so as not to waka the gear us want some coffee. I'm nother to socialize, Ethan, the use of his formal name was a clear sign of displeasure. Here to end this madness before you destroy everything our family has built. Ethan took a deep breath, pouring coffee for himself. If you were talking about the treatment money, 50, 0 for it. Now we can buy your medicine and 50,000, Mrs. Davies interrupted, shocked. That's the least I could do, he finished, moving closer to her bed and offering her the violin. This instrument belongs to your family. I just want to help. Mrs. Davies touched the violin with trembling fingers, tracing the compass rosy ched in the wood. A sudden coughing fits hook her frail body, and Ethan watched Dinah Larmas she struggled to catch her breath. Grandma, Abby ran to get a glass of water while Sophie limbered onto the bed to hold her grandmother's hand. I'm fine, dears, Mrs. Davies managed to say after a few moments. I just need to rest a little. Ethan pulled a chair closer to the bed, his expression determined. Mrs. Davies we need to talk about your health. Abby and Sophie told me about your cough, about how exhausted you've been. The worry soft with frightened children, she tried to smile, but it was marred by another dry cough. It's nothing serious, Mrs. Martinez said. You need exams. Sophie Cutin, her blue eyes full of concern. I heard her talking. And expensive medicine, Abby added, bringing the glass of water. That's why we wanted to sell the violin. Mrs. Davies took a few sips, her hands trembling. You shouldn't have to worry about these things, she murmured, stroking Sophie's hair. And now you won't have veto, Ethan declared firmly. Mrs. Davies, tomorrow I'm booking appointments with the best doctors in New York. No discussion, Head did when she tried to protest. You took care of me for years, taught me lessons that go far beyond music. Now it's my turn to give back. Ethan, she began, but was cut off by another bout of coughing. When she could speak again, her voice was weaker. You have your own life, your responsibilities. None of them are more important than this, he insisted. Please let me help. If not for you, then for the girls. Mrs. Davies looked at their granddaughters, at Abby arranging food on plates, at Sophie still clutching her hand tightly. Tears filled Harry's. They are all I have left, she whispered. After Margaret and John, her voice broke. I know, Ethan said gently. Abby told me about the accident. I am so sorry. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the clinking of utensils as Abby prepared the plates. Ethan saw how Mrs. Davies seemed to struggle to keep her race up in, the fatigue evidenting every line in her face. You need to eat and then rest, he said, standing to help Abby with the plates. We can talk more tomorrow. And don't worry, headed, seeing the concern in her eyes, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here when you wake up. Mrs. Davies offered a faint smile, allowing the girls to help her settle more comfortably. You were always special, Ethan Parker, she murmured. I could see beyond that surname from the start. Ethan sat down, again, watching as Abby and Sophie helped their gra and mother with her dinner. His phone vibrated insistently in his pocket. Likely his father, furious that the dimmest the afternoon meeting. But for the first time in years, the Parker expectations felt insignificant compared to what really mattered. The violin with the compass rose rested gent lie on the dresser, its graceful curves catching the lustre a sun that filtered through the window. Somehow that instrument had guided Ethan back home, not to the Parker penthouse on the Upper East Side, but to this small apartment where love and music were worth more than any fortune. Night fell over the city, and with it came new promises. Ethan knew the conversation the next day would be difficult. Mrs. Davies would have to be honest about their condition, her worries, her fears. But for now, watching 3 generations of strong women share a simple meal, he allowed himself ascency of hope. Music really could guide us through any storm, and this, Ethan silently vowed, would be storm they would face together. Night had fallen over New York, blanketing the small apartment in soft shade OWS. Abby and Sophie had finally drifted off Tozel upon the living room couch, exhausted by the day's emotional turmoil. Ethan covered them with a blanket found in the closet, smiling at how Sophie still clutched herded diaper tightly even in sleep. Back in the bedroom, he found Mrs. Davies more alert after eating properly for the first time in days. She was propped up against the pillows, the violin in her lap, her fingers gently stroking the agged wood. They're amazing, aren't they? She murmured, her gaze directed toward the living room where her granddaughters slept, so young and already so strong. Just like their grandmother, Ethan replied, sitting in the chair beside Herb. Mrs. Davies would need to talk, and this time I want the whole truth. She sighed, a tired sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world, always so direct, Ethan. Some things never change. Here yes Methus, And for a moment he saw the strong teacher who had shaped his childhood again. "Where do you want to start?" "From the beginning," he said softly. "What happened after? Is stopped taking lesson S. How did we interfere?" Mrs. Davies wassilent for a moment, her fingers still tracing the compass Roseo and the violin life wenten, as it always does. He taught other students. "None as stubborn as you," she smiled briefly. "My daughter married John. He was a wonderful cellist. They built their careers together in the New York Philharmonic. Abby was born first, then Sophie. They were the perfect family." Her voice faltered, and Ethan noticed how her hands trembled slightly. "I had a good apartment in Cambridge, near the conservatory, where I taught. The girls visited me every weekend. Margaret was always trying to convince me to retire, saying I had worked enough. But how do you explain that music isn't just work for 'em? It's life." A dry cough interrupted her, and Ethan quickly offered her the glass of water. After a few sips, she continued. Then came the trainy night. Margaret and John were returning from a performance. The car. The roads were slippery. "Abby told me about the accident," Ethan said gently. "John died instantly," Mrs. Davies whispered, silent tear scarving paths down her face. "Margaret, she fought for 3 weeks in the hospital. I sold everything I had, my apartment, my savings, even some rare sheet music I decollected over the years. But it wasn't enough. Why didn't you ask for help?" Ethan asked it, his voice tight. "I would have." "Oh dear," she smiled sadly. "You had your own life, and after Margaret," she took a deep breath, "the girls needed stability. He managed Torranthus' apartment, started giving lessons at home. For a while, it worked. Until you got sick," Ethan finished. "How long have you known?" Mrs. Davies closed her yes. "The first diagnosis was 6 months ago. Lung cancer already advanced. The doctors wanted to start treatment right away, but," she gave a bitter laugh, "health insurance isn't exactly a priority when you can barely afford food." Ethan felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. "How long without treatment?" 3 months, maybe less," she replied with a calmness that frightened him. "That's why the girls were so desperate today. They overheard my conversation with Mrs. Martinez last night. A sieve summoned, a new coughing fit seized Mrs. Davies, more violent than the earlierones." Ethan watched in horror as he struggled for breath, dark spots of blood appearing on the handkerchief she pressed to her mouth. "That's it," he declared, grabbing his phone. "McCalling an ambulance right now." "No," she gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Hate the girls. I can't leave them alone. They won't be alone," Ethan promised. "He'll take care of them while you're in the hospital." "Ethan," Mrs. Davies began, but they cut her off. "You taught Memertha music, remember? You taught me about courage, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. Well, this is the right thing. Now I'll pay for the best treatment, the best doctors." The sound of his phone ringing interrupted them. His father, again. This time, Ethan answered. "Where on earth are you?" Walter Parker's voice boomed through the phone. "You missed the most important meeting of the year. The investors." "Dad," Ethan cued them off, his voice firm. "I, with Mrs. Davies, my old music teacher. Theoniha wasted years of your time with those ridiculous lessons. She's dying," Ethan said simply, "cancer, and I'm using my trust fund to pay for her treatment." The silence on Theo the end was deafening. When Walter spoke again, his voice was dangerously controlled. "Have you lost your mind? That money is for strategic investments, not for saving the life of someone who means more to me than any business deal?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm using it for. Ethan Parker, if you do this—" "What? You'll disinherit me?" Ethan gave a humorless laugh. "Fine. At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror now, ing I did the right thing." He hung up, his hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Davies watched him with a mixture of horror and admiration. "Ethan, mo you can't sacrifice your inheritance for him." "I'm not sacrificing anything," he said, already dialing another number. "Finally, honoring everything you taught me." When someone picked up, he continued, "Dr. Peterson, it's Ethan Parker. In need a private ambulance right away and prepare the best suite in the hospital." "Yes, it's sane emergency." While he made arrangements, Mrs. Davies looked over other granddaughters still eeping in the living room. "What about them?" she asked softly. "I can to leave them. I told you I'll take care of them," Ethan promised. "I have a vacant apartment in the building next to the hospital. We can move there tomorrow so they can visit you every day and once you get better." "If we get better," she corrected gently. "When?" Ethan insisted. "When you get better, we'll find a better place for all of you to live. Somewhere with a proper music studio so you can teach again if you want." Mrs. Davies smiled, tears shining in Harry's. "You've really grown up, Ethan Parker. Your parents might not see it, but I see the wonderful man you've become." The sound of approaching sirens drifted there off the window. Ethan got up and went into the living room, where Abby and Sophie were beginning to stir, awakened by the noise. "Don't Ethan?" Abby mumbled sleepily. "What's happening?" Heck knelt beside the sofa, his heart aching at the fear in the girl's eyes. "Your grandma needs to go to the hospital," he explained gently. "But don't worry, she's going to get the best treatment possible. Andy Outwell will stay with me while she's there." "No," Sophie cried, tears already streaming down her face. "I don't want to be away from Grandma." "And you won't," he promised. "We removing to an apartment really close to the hospital. You can visit her every day, I promise." Abby, always more pragmatic, held her sister's hand. "It's because of her cough, isn't it? Is Grandma going to be okay?" Ethan looked into Harry's, seeing the same strength as saw in Mrs. Davies. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure of that. But now I need Yatwa to be very brave, all right? I'll help your grandma get ready for the hospital, and then we—" "No," Abby interrupted, standing up. "We'll help. We'll always help Grandma," he nodded, respecting the girl's resolve. Together they turned to the bedroom where Mrs. Davies was already trying to stand. "My little ones," she called, opening her arms. The girls ran to her, and for a moment Ethan saw the full extent of the love that boo and this small family together. "Grandma will have to stay in the hospital for a while," Mrs. Davies explained, kissing each granddaughter on the forehead. "But Ethan will take good care of you, I'm sure, and you'll be able to visit me all the time. Promise you won't leave us like Mommy and Daddy did?" Sophie sobbed. Mrs. Davies closed Harry's for a moment, tears escaping from beneath her lashes. "I promise I'll fight with all my strength to stay with you, my loves." The medical team arrived minutes later, efficient and discreet. While they helped Mrs. Davies prepare for transport, Ethan packed a small bag of clothes and personal items. Abby pointed out the violin Mrs. Davies called as she lay on the stretcher. "Ethan, please." Hunter stood immediately, taking the instrument and gently placing it in its case. "I'll bring it to the hospital tomorrow," he promised, along with the girls. On the way to the ambulance, his eyes met those of Mrs. Martinez, who had come upstairs to see what was happening and take a good care of them. The neighbor pleaded, tears in Harry's. "With my life," Ethan promised. As the ambulance drove off into the night, its siren silent at Mrs. Davies' request so as not to frighten the girls, Ethan felt the full weight of his promises. His father would surely try to stop him from sink the trust fund. The family's lawyers were probably already being called D, and there was the matter of the girls' guardianship to resolve. But looking at Abby and Sophie, who watched the ambulance disappear around the corner, their small hands clasped together, Heck knew he would doitle over again. Mrs. Davies had taught him that some things were more important than money or status. Family, love, music, Coming on, he said softly, holding the violin in one hand and extending the other to the girls. It's getting cold out there. Abby hesitated for a moment before taking his hand Ethan. She asked in a small voice, Is Grandma going toady? Heck knelt on the sidewalk, looking into the eyes of both girls. Not if I can help it, he promised. Your grandma's strong, and now she has something very important told Ivy for you too. And he promise, I'll do everything in my power to help her. Sophie let go her sister, Shanto Hugum suddenly. Abby soon followed, and Ethan found himself wrapping both of them in his arms, feeling their small tears soak his shirt. We're a family now, Sophie whispered against his chest. Aren't we? Ethan felt his heart's well withal of he hadn't ever experienced before. Yes, he answered, his voice tight with emotion. We're a family. The violin with the compass rose Leinitska C, silent but present, a witness to the promise being made there on his sidewalk. Music really could guide us through any store, Ethan thought. And this would be storm they would facetoge there as a family. His phone vibrated again in his pocket, probably more threats from his father. But for the first time in his life, Ethan Parker felt no fear of the future. He had found something more valuable than an inheritance, a purpose. The apartment near Massachusetts General H. Hospital had turned into a small sanctuary in the last few days. Ethan leaned against the living room doorway, watching Abby hold her grandmother, Violin, reverently as she tried to play, then Otisov Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Sophie sat on the floor, hugging her trusty teddy bear, her blue eyes locked on her sister, with admiration, almost, Ethan encouraged, when Abby missed a note. Remember what your grandma always says? Music is like astery. Each note is a word, and when it to give a chona the time to shine. Abby smiled, adjusting her hold on the violin. It was impressive how, in just 2 weeks, she was already showing so much natural tale, natua. Grandma was so happy when I played for Harry's turday, she said, restarting the melody. Did you see how where yes lit up? And Shirley smiled, Sophie added, swaying to the rhythm. It was the first times Shirley smiled since she went to the hospital. Ethan felt his heart tighten. The late stround of Mrs. Davies' test hadn't brought good news. The cancer was spreading faster than expected, despite the aggressive treatment. But they refused to give up, and more importantly, he refused to let the girls lose hope. Sophie, he called, sitting at the piano he'd installed in the apartment. Why don't I show your sister? That piece we've been practicing? The little one, Saya sparkled. She ran to the piano, sitting next to Ethan on the bench. Her tiny hands found the keys with surprising precision for a 4-year-old. 1, 2, 3, Ethan counted softly, and together they began playing a simplified version of Foo Release. Sophie still missed some notes, but their enthusiasm made up for an accurate eyes. Abby lowered her violin, watching her sister proudly. Mom used to play that, she said softly. Grandma says she played it to help us follow eep when we were babies. Ethan noticed Sophie slips tightens lightly at the mention of her mother, her fingers hesitating on the piano keys for a moment. It was in those small gestures that they saw how much the girls still grieved, even as they tried to be strong. Hey, he called gently, pausing the music. What do you say we go visit your grandma now? We can bring the instruments and give Harley Teetle concert. Can I take the drawings I made? Sophie asked, already jumping off the bench. Of course you can, little one. I'm sure your grandma will love them. While the girls ran off to their rooms to get her Edie, Ethan checked his phone messages. 15 missed calls from his father Intel as 2 hours. Ever since he deuced part of his trust fund to pay for Mrs. Davies's treatment, Walter Parker had been on a crusade to bring his son to his senses. To Ethan, Abby's voice pulled him back to the present. She stood in her bedroom doorway, holding the violin case. Do you think Grandma's going to get better? His heart clenched. Abby had always been the more perceptive of Tetwu, picking upon the doctor's hushed expressions and whispered conversations in the hospital corridors. "Come here," he said, sitting down on the couch. Abby approached, and he pulled her onto his lap, something she had only recently begun to all ow. "Your grandma's fighting with all her strength, and we redoing everything we can to help. But the most important thing is that no matter what happens, you and Sophie will never be alone. Understand?" She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "You promise you won't leave us, even if, Grandma." "Hey, look at me," Haskett softly. When the Rias met, Ethan's a wall the fear and uncertainty she had read to hide from her young sister. "I promise with all my heart that I'll always be here for you. We're a family now, remember?" "A family," she repeated, a small smile appearing on her lips. "I'm ready," Sophie announced, bounding into the living room with a folder full of drawings. She stopped when she saw her sister in Ethan's lap. "I want a hug, too." Soon, Ethan had both girls in his arms, his heart overflowing with love for the silly little souls who had come into his life so unexpectedly. The trip to the hospital was short but always filled with lively chatter. Sophie talked about the pictures she'd drawn, mostly of her grandmother playing the violin and surrounded by hearts and flowers. Abby mentally rehearsed the songs she wanted Dee to play, her fingers moving in the iris, how Holdy nung the violin. In the hospital room, they found Mrs. Davies paler than usual, though Harry still lit to pet the sight of her granddaughters. "My little melodies?" She smiled, extending her arms. "Grandma," Sophie ran to Huger, her drawings fluttering. "Look what I made for you." "And I learned a new piece," Abby announced, already removing the violin from its case. Ethan helped Mrs. Davies sit up more comfortably, noting how each movement seemed to cause her pain, even though she tried to hide it. "Ethan," she whispered, while the girls arranged themselves for their mini-concert. "We need to talk about the future." "Not now," he replied gently. "Let's enjoy the music first." Abby began playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, each note executed carefully. Mrs. Davies's eyes filled with tears. "She has her mother's gift," she whispered. And Sophie, the same passion for piano that John had. The little concert lasted almost an hour. Sophie showed all her drawings, explaining each detail with the excitement typical of Ridge. Abby played every piece he had learned, proud of her progress. But Ethan noticed Mrs. Davies growing more tired, her breathing more labored. When a nurse came to check her vitals, Heck knew it was to go. "But haven't shown her my last drawing," Sophie protested. "We can come back first thing tomorrow," Ethan promised. "Your grandma needs tourist now." Mrs. Davies kissed her granddaughters, holding them a bit more tightly than usual. "My little stars," she murmured. "How you shine." On the drive back to the apartment, Ethan noticed Abby was unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" he asked when Sophie fell asleep in the back seat. "Grandma's worse, isn't she?" Abby asked in a small voice. I saw how the nurse looked at the machines. Ethan took a deep breath. "Your grandma's very sick, yes. But that doesn't mean we're giving up. And more importantly," he took her small hand, "it doesn't mean you have to carry this burden alone, okay?" Abby squeezed his hand, nodding silently. When they arrived at the apartment, she helped carry Sophie, who didn't wake up even when placed in bed. "Ethan," Abby called when he was leaving the room. "Thank you for everything." His heart swelled with love. "That's what families do," he answered simply. Later, after the girls were asleep, Ethan sat at the piano, playing softly so as not to wake them. His phone vibrated again. Another message from his father, probably another threat or ultimatum. Tomorrow, he thought, he would have to face Walter Parker and his demands. He would have to defend his choice to prioritize his new family over the Parker empire. It would beat battle, But looking at Sophie's drawings scattered across the table, hearing Abby, soft breathing through the half-open bedroom door, Ethan knew it would be worth it. Music really had guided him through the storm, bringing him to where he had always needed to be. The violin with the compass rose arrested in its case, silent but present as always, like a promise that no matter what happened, music and love would find a way. Morning arrived with the sound of rain softle, you tapping against the apartment windows. Ethan was in the kitchen making breakfast for the girls when the doorbell rang. He already knew who it was before opening it. His father was never the kind to wait for an invitation. Walter Parker entered like a contained storm, his immaculate Italian suit clashing with he apartment's warm simplicity. His cold gazes swept the room, pausing at Sophie's drawings on the fridge and the violin resti on the piano. So this is where the Parker hair has been hiding, his voice dripped disapproval. Playing house while you throw your future away. Good morning to you, too, Dad, Ethan replied, keeping his voice low so as not to whack the gear else want some coffee? I'm nother to socialize, Ethan. The use of his formal name was a clear sign of displeasure. I'm here to end this madness before you destroy everything our family has built. Ethan took a deep breath, pouring coffee for himself. If you were talking about the treatment, money. $50,000 for the violin, $300,000 for the initial treatment, another $200,000 for exams and medication. Walter interrupted, pulling a paper from his inside pocket. And now this. A meeting with one of Boston's most expensive family attorneys? You seriously intend to file for these children's guardianship? How did you? I'm Walter Parker. Nothing happens in this city without me knowing. He threw the paper on the table. What are you trying to prove, Ethan? That you can be a rebel? That you can defy everything I've taught you? I'm not trying to prove anything, Ethan replied, his voice steady. I'm doing what's right. Mrs. Davies needs... Mrs. Davies, Walter let out a humorless laugh. Your old music teacher, the woman who wasted 5 years trying to turn my son into a mediocre musician instead of preparing him for his real duties. Don't talk about her like that, Ethan's voice took on a warning tone. You don't know anything about her or what she means to me. I know she's dying, Walter stated coldly. And in some moment of insanity, you decided it would be a good idea to take responsibility for her orphaned granddaughters. Did you stop to think about the implications? The responsibility of raising 2 children? Actually, I've thought a lot about it. Ethan placed his cup on the table with more force than necessary. I've thought about how these girls lost their parents in a terrible accident, about how their grandma sold everything she had to try to save them, about how they were starving when I found them. And that makes you, a single 28-year-old man with 0 parenting experience, the best option to raise them? Walter arched an eyebrow. Be realistic, Ethan. There are proper families who could adopt them, families with experience, with structure. Ethan? The small voice made both men turn. Abby stood in the kitchen doorway, still in pajamas, her green eyes flicking between Ethan and the imposing stranger in the expensive suit. Hey, sweetheart, Ethan smiled, extending a hand to her. It's okay. This is my father. Abby approached hesitantly, her small hand finding Ethan's. Walter observed the interaction with an unreadable expression. Good morning, sir, she said politely, just as Mrs. Davies had taught. Walter gave a brief nod. Where's your sister? Sophie's still asleep, Abby replied, lowering her voice. She was up late last night, worried about Grandma. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. The previous evening, Mrs. Davies had had a particularly rough coughing spell, scaring the girls. Abby, he said softly, why don't you go wake your sister? We need to get ready to visit your grandma. She hesitated, glancing back at Walter. Will you still be here when we come back? The question carried a weight that made even Walter Parker look uncomfortable. Yes, sweetheart, Ethan assured her. I'm not going anywhere. After Abby left, Walter turned to his son. Don't you see? They're already dependent on you. And when you inevitably fail to be what they need? I'm not going to fail, Ethan interrupted. Know why? Because contrary to what you think, being a father isn't about business success or keeping up appearances. It's about love, dedication, being present. How dare you? Walter took a step forward, his voice shaking with anger. Everything I did, every decision I made, was for your future. No, Dad, it was for the Parker future, which isn't necessarily the same thing. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. You know what Mrs. Davies told me on my first day of violin lessons? Music doesn't care about your last name. She was right. And these girls don't care that I'm a Parker or not. They only need someone to love and protect them. The sound of childish laughter drifted from the hallway. Sophie must have woken up. Walter looked toward the sound, something in his expression softening almost imperceptibly. You're throwing your legacy away, he said, but his voice had lost some of its harshness. Everything I built. I'm not throwing anything away, Ethan replied gently. I'm choosing a different legacy, one that isn't measured in dollars or square footage. The bedroom door opened, and Sophie ran into the kitchen, dragging her teddy bear. She stopped when she saw Walter, hiding partly behind Abby. Good morning, little one, Ethan smiled, opening his arms. Sophie ran to him immediately, letting him pick her up. This is my father. Your tie is pretty, Sophie said shyly, making Walter blink in surprise. Thank you, he replied automatically, observing how his son, his heir, the future of the Parker family, held the girl with natural paternal affection. Dad, Ethan said softly, I know this isn't what you planned for me. But look at them. Really look. They're two incredible kids who have already lost too much. And now, his voice broke slightly. Now they're about to lose their grandma, too. I can't abandon them. I won't. Walter Parker was known in the business world for his ability to read people, to identify strengths and weaknesses. And what he saw now in his son was not weakness. It was a determination he had never witnessed before. You're really going to do this? It wasn't a question. Give up everything? I'm not giving up anything, Ethan corrected. I'm gaining a family. The silence that followed was broken by Ethan's phone ringing. It was the hospital. Yes, he answered, still holding Sophie, his face going pale as he listened. I understand. We're on our way. Grandma? Abby asked immediately, her voice trembling. She's having a rough day, Ethan answered carefully. The doctors think it's best if we go see her now. Is she going to die? Sophie asked, tears already spilling down her round cheeks. Oh, sweetheart. Ethan hugged her tighter. Your grandma is very strong, but yes, she's very sick. Walter observed the scene with a complex expression. Ethan. Dad, Ethan cut him off, putting Sophie down gently. I need to get them to the hospital. You can walk out and cut me off financially, or you can stay and meet your new family. It's your choice. He turned to the girls. Let's get dressed quickly. Grandma's waiting. While the girls rushed to their rooms, Walter Parker remained motionless in the kitchen, looking at the drawings on the fridge. A family of 4 with a violin hovering above them like a guiding star. You really think you can do this? He finally asked. Raise 2 kids on your own? I'm not alone, Ethan replied, picking up the violin with the compass rose. I have music. I have love. And, he looked meaningfully at his father, maybe, if you allow it, I can have an even bigger family than I ever imagined. Walter adjusted his expensive tie, a gesture Ethan recognized as a sign of nervousness since childhood. I'm going to need time to process all of this. I understand, Ethan smiled slightly. But don't take too long. Your granddaughters need a grandfather. The girls came back, dressed and ready, Abby holding a folder of sheet music. Are we going to play for Grandma today? She asked hopefully. Of course we are, Ethan replied, grabbing the car keys. Music always makes her feel better. Walter watched as his son got the girls organized, double-checking they had everything they needed, adjusting Sophie's scarf, praising the hairstyle Abby had done on her own. It was a side of Ethan, no, of Jack, he had never witnessed before. "Son," he called as they reached the door, "you'll need a good attorney for the guardianship process." Ethan turned, surprised. "Dad?" "Parker and Associates has the best lawyers on the East Coast," Walter continued, as though discussing a business deal. I can make some calls." A small smile appeared on Ethan's face. "Thank you, Dad." Walter nodded stiffly, then shocked everyone by crouching to the girl's eye level. "It was nice to meet you, Abby and Sophie. Maybe we can get to know each other better soon." Sophie, following her naturally affectionate nature, hugged the man's legs. "Your tie really is very pretty," she said solemnly. Something like a smile flickered briefly across Walter Parker's face. On the way to the hospital, Ethan couldn't help thinking about the strange turns life takes. A month ago, he had been adrift in a sea of expectations and obligations. Now he had a clear purpose, an unconditional love for two small orphans, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance to reconcile both sides of his life. Abby silently practiced her fingerings, preparing to play for her grandmother. Sophie slept in the back seat, clutching her teddy bear tightly. And somewhere in the city, Walter Parker was beginning to understand that some fortunes can't be measured in dollars. The violin with the compass rose lay on the back seat, silent but present as always. Music really could guide them through any storm, even through the storms of the heart. Morning came quietly and gray at Massachusetts General Hospital. Ethan looked out the window of room 507 as the city slowly woke up, the first daylight fighting its way through the heavy clouds that promised rain. The rhythmic sound of the heart monitor had become a constant presence in recent days, its weaker and weaker beeping echoing the battle Mrs. Davies was losing. Abby slept curled up in a chair in the corner, protecting her grandmother's violin in her lap like a talisman. Sophie had finally fallen asleep in the bed beside Mrs. Davies, her small hand still tightly clasped around her grandmother's. The last 72 hours had been an emotional roller coaster as pneumonia developed quickly, a complication of her already advanced cancer. Ethan allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, letting the tears he'd held back slip silently down his face. How could he explain to two children who'd already lost so much that they might have to say goodbye once again? How could he prepare them for another loss? "Is the sun coming up?" Mrs. Davies's weak voice startled him. He turned quickly, wiping his face. She was awake, her blue eyes, Sophie's eyes, still shining despite the illness. "Yes," he answered softly, moving closer to the bed. "Want me to open the curtains more?" "Please," she whispered. "I've always loved sunrise. Each day is a new chance to make music." Ethan drew the curtains back, letting more light into the room. Mrs. Davies gazed at her sleeping granddaughters, a faint but loving smile on her pale lips. "They're so strong," she murmured, "stronger than they realize." "Like their grandmother," Ethan replied, sitting down in the chair beside her. Mrs. Davies tried to laugh, but the sound turned into a dry cough. Ethan quickly offered her water, helping her drink a few sips. "Ethan," she said once she'd caught her breath, "I need you to promise me some things." "Mrs. Davies, don't." "Please," she insisted, her hand trembling as she held his. "We don't have much time, and there's so much I need to say." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Mrs. Davies took a deep breath, each word obviously costing her tremendous effort. "Abby," she began, looking toward her older granddaughter. "She carries so much responsibility on those small shoulders, always trying to be strong for everyone. Promise me you'll let her be a child sometimes. Teach her it's okay to cry, to be angry, to be imperfect." "I promise," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. "And Sophie," she went on, stroking her younger granddaughter's hair, "my little dreamer. She feels everything so deeply. The world can be so frightening at times. Promise you will protect her innocence, but also teach her to be strong." "With my life," he vowed. Mrs. Davies gave a faint smile. "You know, when Margaret and John died, I thought my world had ended. But these little ones, they gave me a reason to keep going. And now, you." "I always wondered," Ethan said softly, "why you never reached out to me when you needed help." She closed her eyes briefly. "You had your own life and your own battles to fight. And after the accident, well, the girls needed stability. I couldn't risk more changes in their lives. Still," Ethan insisted, "if I had known—" "Oh dear," she smiled, that smile that had brightened so many of his childhood lessons. "You were always special, you know. From that very first lesson, when you walked in all formal in your little suit, trying to look like the perfect Parker heir. But your eyes always revealed your true heart." The memory hit Ethan with full force. His first violin lesson at age 8. He had been so nervous, so determined not to disappoint his father. "Music doesn't care about your last name, dear," Mrs. Davies had said, placing a violin in his hands for the first time. "It only cares about what's in your heart." "You changed my life that day," he confessed. "It was the first time anyone saw me just as Ethan. And that's why," she breathed deeply, fighting another wave of coughing, "that's why I know you'll take good care of them. Because your heart has always been bigger than your last name." Abby stirred in the chair, her green eyes opening slowly. Seeing her grandmother awake, she practically jumped out of the seat. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, rushing to the bed. The movement woke Sophie, who blinked sleepily. "My little stars," Mrs. Davies smiled, her voice weaker. "How about a little music to start the day?" Abby immediately picked up the violin, positioning it the way her grandmother had taught. Sophie scooted closer on the bed, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but shining with anticipation. The first notes of Ave Maria filled the room, each note steeped in love and devotion. Mrs. Davies closed her eyes, letting the music envelop her like a hug. "Mom used to play that song to help her sleep," Sophie commented softly. "Grandma says it was her favorite." "It was," Mrs. Davies confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret, your mother? She had a special gift." Music flowed through her like water. Abby kept playing, but Ethan noticed silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Mrs. Davies noticed too. "Abby, dear," she called, "come here a moment." The girl lowered the violin, stepping up to the bed. Mrs. Davies touched her face with trembling fingers, wiping away her tears. "You have the same gift she did, you know. But more important than that, you have the same heart, strong, kind, full of music." A cough interrupted her, more violent this time. Ethan moved quickly to help her, but she made a gesture for him to wait. When she regained her breath, she continued. "I want you to promise me something, Abby. Promise you'll keep playing, no matter what happens. Music will always guide you through life's storms." "I promise, Grandma," Abby replied solemnly. "And you, my little Sophie," Mrs. Davies turned to her young granddaughter. "Promise you'll keep that heart so full of love and dreams. The world needs more light like yours." Sophie hugged her grandmother gently. "I promise, Grandma, but you have to promise something too." "What is it, my love?" "Promise you'll send us signs from heaven, like shooting stars or rainbows, so we know you're okay." Mrs. Davies fought back tears. "Oh, my little angel, I'll do even better. Whenever you hear music, whenever your hearts fill with melody, I'll be there. There in every note, every chord." Another coughing fit interrupted her, this one worse than before. Ethan noticed with alarm the blood spots on the handkerchief she used. "Girls," he called gently, "how about going to get some breakfast? Your grandma needs a bit of rest." "No," Sophie clung to her grandmother. "I don't want to go." "It's okay," Mrs. Davies managed. "I just need to close my eyes for a moment." Abby, always more perceptive, took her sister's hand. "Come on, Sophie. Grandma needs to sleep so she can get strong again. We can bring her hot chocolate later." Mrs. Davies smiled faintly, her eyes already closing from exhaustion. "My little ones." And so wise. When the girls left with a nurse who offered to take them to the cafeteria, Mrs. Davies opened her eyes again, meeting Ethan's. "Not much time left," she said simply. "I know," he replied, holding her hand. "The doctors? They said the pneumonia is spreading fast." "Ethan," she squeezed his hand with surprising strength, "you know what you have to do, right? When I'm gone." "I'll take care of them," he promised. "I've already started the paperwork for guardianship. My father, he's helping, believe it or not. He's hired the best lawyers. Walter Parker," she smiled weakly, "always so determined to control everything. But deep down, he has a good heart, like his son. He's changed since he met the girls. I guess they have that effect on people." "They have the gift of finding the best in everyone," Mrs. Davies agreed. "Like their mother, Margaret always saw beauty in everything." Her voice trailed off, a pained expression crossing her face. "Mrs. Davies." "I'm fine," she breathed. Just tired." "Ethan, the violin. It stays with the girls." "Of course, it's not just an instrument," she insisted. "It's our story, our heritage." "The compass rose. We'll guide them through any storm," Ethan finished softly. "I know, and I promise I'll keep music alive in their lives." Mrs. Davies smiled, her eyes drifting shut again. "You're a good man, Ethan Parker. I've always known that, ever since that first day, that there was music in your heart." Her words grew weaker, her breathing more labored. Ethan pressed the nurse's call button. "Rest," he whispered. "The girls will be here when you wake up." But something in his heart told him Mrs. Davies would not wake again, not in this world at least. The next hours were a blur of medical interventions and precious moments. The girls returned, and Abby played more music, everything her grandmother had taught her. Sophie sang along, her childish voice mingling with the violin's notes. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to set and bathe the room in golden light, Mrs. Eleanor Davies left this world. Abby was playing Amazing Grace, her mother's favorite hymn. Sophie was snuggled against her grandmother's side, humming softly. Ethan held her other hand. There was no drama, no struggle. Just one last gentle breath, one final smile, and then silence. The heart monitor let out its final long beep at the exact moment Abby bowed the last note. "Grandma?" Sophie called softly. "Grandma, wake up?" Abby lowered the violin, her hands trembling. Ethan wrapped them both in his arms as the doctors and nurses rushed in. "She's not suffering anymore," he whispered, feeling their tears dampen his shirt. "She's at peace now." The following hours were a whirlwind of necessary procedures and tough decisions. Ethan kept the girls close, shielding them from the gentle yet efficient chaos that follows a loved one's passing. Walter Parker arrived at the hospital shortly after, surprising everyone. "The girls shouldn't stay here," he said simply. "I'll take them for some ice cream while you handle what needs to be done." Ethan nodded, grateful for the unexpected help. "Abby, Sophie, want to go with Grandpa Walter?" The girls looked at the man who, just a few weeks ago, had been a stranger. But something in his posture, usually so rigid, had softened. "You can pick any flavor you like," Walter offered, his voice gentle in a way Ethan rarely heard. Sophie took his hand without hesitation. Abby hesitated a moment longer, looking back at Ethan. "Will everything be okay?" she asked. "Yes," he promised. "And I'll be home when you get back." Watching his father walk away with the girls, Ethan felt a wave of gratitude. Music really did have the power to transform hearts, even the seemingly inflexible heart of Walter Parker. Later that night, back at the apartment, Sophie finally fell asleep, after crying until she had no tears left. Abby sat at the piano, her fingers pressing the keys soundlessly. "She's really gone, isn't she?" she asked when Ethan sat beside her. "Yes, sweetheart," he answered honestly. "But you know what never goes away? All the love she had for you, all the lessons, all the stories, all the memories." Abby leaned against him, allowing herself to be just a 5-year-old who had lost her last connection to her parents. "Ethan," she said after a long silence, "what happens now?" "Well," he took a deep breath, "tomorrow we'll start all the legal steps for me to officially become your guardian. There will be a social worker who'll visit us, and she'll ask a lot of questions to make sure you'll be safe and happy with me. It might feel a little scary at first, but I promise I'll be right there with you." Abby nodded, her fingers still brushing silently over the piano keys. What if they won't let us stay with you?" "That won't happen," Ethan assured, though his heart tightened at the possibility. "Your Grandpa Walter hired the best lawyers. And more importantly, we have something no one can deny. We're a family that chose each other through music and love." Sophie shifted in her sleep on the sofa, murmuring something about violins and angels. Abby looked at her sister with protective eyes. "Grandma said music would guide us," she murmured, picking up the violin with the compass rose. "And it will," Ethan smiled gently, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Want to play one last song before bed?" Abby positioned the violin the way her grandmother taught, and the soft notes of Amazing Grace filled the apartment once more. This time, though, the melody carried not just sadness, but also hope. Hope for a new beginning, for a family rebuilt by love and music. The violin with the compass rose shone gently under the lamplight, its graceful curves a reminder that even on the darkest nights, music will find a way to guide lost hearts back home. "So, Abby, what do you like most about living with Ethan?" The question from social worker Karen Miller hung in the living room air, while Abby continued to play softly on her grandmother's violin. It was the 5th visit in 3 weeks, and Ethan could feel the girl's nervousness through the slightly unsteady notes of Moonlight Sonata. "He teaches me about music," Abby finally replied, lowering the instrument, like Grandma did. "But also," she hesitated, glancing at Ethan for reassurance, "he lets me just be a kid sometimes, when I'm sad or angry." Karen jotted down a few notes in her folder, her perceptive eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses taking in every interaction. Sophie, who had been coloring on the rug, looked up. "And he makes star-shaped pancakes," she exclaimed, abandoning her colored pencils to run to Ethan. "And he never gets mad if I mess up the piano notes, and he tells different bedtime stories every night." "And Sophie," Ethan chuckled, picking her up, "let Mrs. Miller ask her questions, all right?" The social worker smiled, but Ethan noticed how her eyes took in every detail of the apartment. The neatly arranged sheet music on the piano, the girls' drawings on the fridge, the violin with the compass rose now displayed on a specially built shelf. "Mr. Parker," she began, her tone professional but not unkind, "can you tell me about your daily routine with the girls?" Ethan adjusted Sophie on his lap. "I wake up at 6 to make breakfast. Abby usually gets up soon after. She likes practicing violin in the morning, says that's when her grandma used to practice. Sophie sleeps in a bit more because I stay up late dreaming of little music angels," Sophie cut in, causing Karen to smile. After breakfast, Ethan continued, "We do homeschooling for now. The child psychologist, Dr. Rachel, suggested waiting a bit before enrolling them in regular school to give them time to process their grief. Abby is particularly good at math, and Sophie has a natural gift for art. And music," Abby quickly added. "Sophie can already play almost all of For Elise on the piano." Karen made more notes. "And what about emotional support? How do you handle the difficult moments?" Ethan took a deep breath, recalling the previous night. Sophie had woken up crying, calling for her grandma. Instead of trying to force her back to bed, he'd taken her to the piano. "Sometimes," he replied, "when the pain of missing her is too much, we make music. Other times, we just cry together. Mrs. Davies, she taught us there's no shame in feeling, in being vulnerable." Music doesn't judge our tears, dear, his old teacher's voice echoed in his memory. It transforms them into something beautiful. Ethan, Abby's voice brought him back to the present. She'd come closer, still holding the violin like a shield. Mrs. Miller, the girl began, her voice small but determined. I know you need to make sure we're okay, that Ethan can take care of us. But, she looked over at her sister, still in Ethan's lap. We've already lost so many people. Please, don't let them take him away too. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Sophie sniffing, pressing her face into Ethan's chest. Karen slowly closed her folder. Abby, Sophie, you both know there's a court hearing tomorrow, right? The girls nodded. The judge will ask a lot of questions, like I did. He needs to be sure this is the best situation for you. Do you understand? But we already know it is, Sophie protested. Ethan is our family now. He promised. And Ethan always keeps his promises. Karen stood up, adjusting her glasses. Mr. Parker, may I speak to you in private, in the kitchen? While the girls returned to their activities in the living room, Karen got straight to the point. Do you realize how unusual this situation is? A single 28-year-old man with no prior experience with children, seeking custody of two girls who aren't biologically related to him. I do, Ethan answered frankly. But I also realize how unusual the love we've built is, the bond we share through music, through Mrs. Davies's memory. Ethan, she interrupted gently, I'm not questioning the love. It's evident in every interaction I've observed. But the system has protocols, precedents. Are they more important than the emotional well-being of two kids who've already lost so much? Karen sighed. Judge Thompson is known to be traditional in his rulings. He'll want to see stability, structure, a concrete plan for the future. And that's exactly what we have. A new voice joined the conversation. Walter Parker stood at the kitchen door, his immaculate suit contrasting with the cozy simplicity of the space. Dad, Ethan frowned. I didn't know you were coming today. We need to discuss some details about tomorrow, Walter replied, then turned to Karen. Mrs. Miller, I presume. Walter Parker, the petitioner's father. Karen shook the hand he offered. Mr. Parker, your presence here is interesting, considering previous reports of your initial opposition to this arrangement. Walter seemed visibly uncomfortable. People can change, Mrs. Miller. Sometimes we just need the right music to open our hearts. As if to illustrate his point, the sound of the violin came from the living room. Abby was practicing Ave Maria, her mother's favorite hymn. Sophie quickly joined in with her childish singing. Grandpa. The music stopped abruptly when Sophie noticed Walter running to hug his legs. To Ethan's surprise, his father smiled, a genuine smile he rarely showed in public. I brought something for you, Walter announced, pulling an envelope from his inner pocket. Preliminary plans for the Eleanor Davies School of Music. Abby approached curiously, still holding the violin. A music school? With scholarships for talented children? Walter explained, spreading architectural drawings on the kitchen table. A proper legacy for your grandma, don't you think? Karen watched with professional interest. Mr. Parker, this project, is it serious? Parker Holdings never does anything halfway, Mrs. Miller, he replied, his business tone softened by Sophie's presence at his side. We already have the property, preliminary approvals, and a substantial fund for scholarships. And Ethan will help? Abby asked, her green eyes studying the drawings. In fact, Walter cleared his throat. I was hoping he would agree to head the entire project, a new branch of our social responsibility division focused on arts and education. Ethan looked at his father, surprised. Dad. Before you say anything, Walter interrupted, this isn't charity or manipulation. It's a genuine attempt to do the right thing, to honor Eleanor Davies's legacy. And, he hesitated, to be the kind of father and grandfather I should have been a long time ago. Karen closed her notebook. Well, this certainly adds a new element to the financial stability equation, but Judge Thompson will still want... The doorbell rang again, cutting her off. Ethan opened it to find Chad Johnson from Silicon Valley Tech Ventures, immaculate in his own Italian suit. "Mr. Parker," he smiled, extending his hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He knew Chad Johnson by reputation. He was Silicon Valley's most respected headhunter. "Actually," he began, but Johnson had already stepped inside, handing out business cards. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said efficiently, "I've come in person because this is a unique opportunity. Silicon Valley Tech Ventures, Director of Operations. A starting salary in the 7 figures, full benefits, including..." "No?" Abby's voice cut through the presentation like a sharp blade. Everyone turned to look at the 5-year-old, who now clutched the violin like armor. "Excuse me?" Johnson blinked, clearly not used to being interrupted. "Ethan isn't leaving," Abby stated, tears shining in her eyes. "He promised." Sophie ran to hug Ethan's legs. "You promised," she echoed, her voice quivering. Johnson looked puzzled. "Mr. Parker, surely we can discuss arrangements for..." "There's nothing to discuss," Ethan interrupted gently, picking Sophie up. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Johnson, but my life, my family, is here." "Perhaps we should save this discussion for tomorrow," Karen suggested diplomatically. "Judge Thompson will want to know about all available options." The next morning was gray and cold, the kind of day Mrs. Davies used to say was perfect for music because the melody brings color to the world, she would explain. The waiting area of the Boston family court was surprisingly full. Mrs. Martinez was there, along with several neighbors. The doctors and nurses who had cared for Mrs. Davies filled an entire row. Even some of her former students had shown up, their instruments carefully tucked in cases under the benches. Abby practiced imaginary fingerings, dressed in her best blue dress, the same color her mother had worn during her last symphony performance. Sophie dozed on Ethan's lap, her teddy bear never far away. Case number 2547, petition for custody of Abby and Sophie Davies. The bailiff's voice echoed through the room, and Ethan felt his heart race. The next few hours would determine not just his future, but also that of the 2 little souls who had already lost so much. Judge Thompson was exactly as Karen had described. Stern, traditional, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose as he scanned the documents before him. "Before we begin," he announced, "I want to establish some facts. Mr. Parker, you are requesting legal custody of Abby and Sophie Davies, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. You have no blood relation to the children, nor any prior experience raising children, correct?" "No, Your Honor, but..." "And you recently abandoned your position in the family company to devote yourself to this arrangement?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Yes, Your Honor, but if I may explain..." "Mrs. Miller," the judge cut him off. "Your report, please." Karen stood, adjusting her glasses. "Your Honor, over the past 3 weeks, I've conducted intensive visits to Mr. Parker's home with the girls. What I found was extraordinary." She described in detail the interactions she had witnessed, the music lessons, the open discussions of their feelings, how Ethan had completely adapted his life to meet the girls' needs. "But most impressive," she went on, "is the community support. Mrs. Martinez," she gestured to the neighbor, "helps with the girls when needed. The doctors who cared for Mrs. Davies continue to monitor the children's well-being. And the Parker family," she glanced at Walter, "is committed to an ambitious project honoring Eleanor Davies's legacy." That was when Chad Johnson stood up. "Your Honor, if I may." The judge nodded, and Johnson formally presented the Silicon Valley Tech Ventures proposal. Ethan felt Abby grip his hand tightly as the astronomical salary, benefits, and opportunities were mentioned. "It's quite an offer," the judge commented. "Mr. Parker?" Ethan rose slowly, still holding Abby's hand. "Your Honor, in the past few weeks, I've learned something no business school could ever teach me. I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in digits or job titles. He picked up the violin with the compass rose that Abby had brought. This instrument has a story. It belonged to the girl's grandmother, and before her, their great-grandmother. Mrs. Davies used to say that music guides us through any storm. She taught me this when I was 8, a frightened boy trying to live up to the Parker name. And now, the judge prompted, now I'm teaching her granddaughters that family isn't just blood. It's commitment, love. He smiled at Abby and Sophie. It's the music we make together. Then something unexpected happened. Abby let go of Ethan's hand and walked to the center of the room, carrying the violin. "Your Honor," she said, her small but clear voice filling the courtroom, "may I play something?" The judge looked surprised, but nodded. Abby positioned the violin exactly as her grandmother had taught her, her tiny fingers finding the strings with precision. For a moment, the entire courtroom held its breath. The first notes of Amazing Grace filled the room, each note charged with emotion. Sophie, recognizing the melody, sat down her teddy bear and walked over to her sister, joining in with her childlike singing. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Ethan watched with silent tears streaming down his face as the girls made their own plea in the best way they knew, through music. In the front row, Walter Parker discreetly wiped his eyes. When the final note faded, Abby lowered the violin and looked directly at the judge. "That was our mom's favorite song," she said. "Grandma taught us that when we play it, they're still with us. Mom, Dad, and now Grandma too." Her voice trembled. "Ethan. He understands that. He knows we need music so we don't forget who we are." Sophie grabbed her sister's hand. "And he's part of our music now," she added simply. A profound silence filled the courtroom. Judge Thompson removed his glasses, wiping them methodically, as if trying to absorb what he had just witnessed. "Mrs. Miller," he finally said, "your final thoughts?" Karen stood, her voice thick with barely restrained emotion. "Your Honor, when I began evaluating this case, I was looking for evidence of stability and capability. What I found was something far rarer: unconditional love and genuine commitment. During my visits, I witnessed moments no report can truly capture." She described how she'd found Ethan teaching Sophie piano at 3 a.m. after a nightmare, how Abby practiced violin every morning, determined to honor her family's legacy, how music had become their language of healing. Furthermore, she continued, the entire community has rallied to support them. Mrs. Martinez helps with the girls. The doctors who cared for Mrs. Davies continue to monitor their well-being. And now she glanced at Walter. Even the Parker family is united in this cause. Chad Johnson stood again. "Your Honor, our offer." "You can keep your offer," Walter Parker interrupted him, surprising everyone. "My son already has a job, building Eleanor Davies's legacy through this new music school, a job that allows him to stay here with his family." The judge watched the scene for a long moment. Ethan hugged the girls, who had returned to his side, feeling their small hearts pounding against his chest. "This is an unprecedented case," the judge began. "We have a non-traditional custody petitioner with no prior parenting experience who left a promising career." He paused, looking at Abby and Sophie. "But we also have 2 extraordinary children who have suffered immense losses and who have clearly found not just stability, but real love and understanding." He stood. "I will retire to deliberate. We'll reconvene in an hour." As the courtroom emptied, Ethan stayed seated, holding Abby and Sophie close. Mrs. Martinez approached with cups of tea for everyone. The doctors and nurses offered words of encouragement. Walter Parker remained in the front row, his restless hands betraying his anxiety. "Ethan?" Abby asked quietly. "What if—" "Shh!" He gently hushed her. "Remember what your grandma used to say? Music guides us through every storm." Sophie took the violin, tracing the compass rose with her small fingers. "Grandma's helping us from heaven," she declared with the certainty only a child can have. The next hour would be the longest of their lives, but for the first time since the process began, Ethan felt true hope, because music and love always find a way. The violin with the compass rose lay silently in its case, witnessing a family that came together not by blood, but through the notes of a melody that began long ago in a music room where a rich boy learned that some fortunes can't be measured in dollars. The bailiff announced Judge Thompson's return, and everyone in the room stood. Abby clutched Ethan's hand tightly, while Sophie hugged her teddy bear, her blue eyes fixed on the imposing figure of the judge. That was when the courtroom doors swung open. Elizabeth Parker, who hadn't been seen in public since the start of the proceedings, hurried inside, her usually composed face showing clear signs of emotion. "I apologize, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking, "but there's something I need to say before you make your decision." Judge Thompson regarded the newcomer with interest. "Mrs. Parker?" "Yes, Your Honor, I'm the petitioner's mother." She stopped next to Walter, and a woman who needs to correct her mistakes. Ethan watched his mother in surprise. Elizabeth Parker had always been the embodiment of social perfection. Seeing her like this, emotionally exposed, was unprecedented. When Ethan was young, she began, "I let societal expectations dictate every aspect of his life. When he showed interest in music, I saw it as a distraction. When Mrs. Davies began nurturing his passion for art, She hesitated. "I helped end the lessons." Abby glanced at Ethan, who couldn't take his eyes off his mother. "But now, seeing my son with these girls, witnessing the love they've built through music, I realize I was wrong. All along." Walter placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, a surprisingly public display of affection for the usually reserved couple. Sophie, led by her tender heart, ran up to Elizabeth. "Will you be our grandma, too?" she asked innocently. The courtroom watched in silence as Elizabeth knelt to hug the little girl, tears streaming freely down her face. "If you'll have me, my love," Walter cleared his throat, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, if I may." When the judge nodded, he continued, "I spent my life building an empire, every decision focused on the Parker legacy. But seeing Ethan with Abby and Sophie, watching how he's transformed pain into music, loss into love, I've realized the true legacy is being built right now." Chad Johnson stood up again. "The Silicon Valley offer is—" "Unnecessary," Ethan interrupted gently. "My place is here, with my girls, with our music." "In fact," Walter added, taking out a folder of documents, "Ethan's going to be quite busy. Your Honor, I present documentation for the Eleanor Davies Foundation." The judge examined the papers with interest as Walter explained. "The foundation will identify and support talented children in vulnerable situations, providing music education and family support. The first project will be the Eleanor Davies School of Music." "And the funding?" the judge asked. "I'm converting my inheritance for the project," Ethan replied. "And we'll match every cent," Elizabeth added, still holding Sophie. "It's time the Parker money served a greater purpose." Abby picked up her violin. "Your Honor," she said, "Grandma used to say that music heals broken hearts. Ethan didn't just give us a home, he kept our music alive." The judge removed his glasses, wiping them carefully. "In 30 years on the family court bench, I've rarely seen a case so extraordinary. What I've witnessed today," he smiled faintly, "proves Mrs. Davies was right about the power of music." Sophie returned to Ethan, taking his hand. Abby took his other, holding her grandmother's violin securely in her arm. "It is the decision of this court," the judge announced, "to grant full and permanent custody of Abby and Sophie Davies to Mr. Ethan Parker." The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Martinez openly wept. The doctors and nurses smiled through tears. In the center of it all, Ethan held his daughters, while his parents joined them in an embrace long overdue. "One last thing," Abby said, positioning the violin. She began to play Amazing Grace. Sophie added her crystal-clear voice to the melody, and to everyone's surprise, Elizabeth joined in as well, her trained voice harmonizing perfectly with her granddaughter's. 6 months later, the auditorium at the Eleanor Davies School of Music was packed for its first benefit recital. Abby and Sophie, wearing complementary shades of blue, got ready on stage. "Ready?" Ethan asked, adjusting the microphone. Abby smiled, holding her grandmother's violin. Sophie nodded, seated at the special piano Walter had imported. In the front row, Elizabeth and Walter watched proudly. The entire community was there, neighbors, doctors, nurses, former students of Mrs. Davies, all witnesses to the miracle a small compass rose engraved on a violin had made possible. "Good evening," Abby spoke into the microphone. "This song is special to our family. Our mom used to play it when we were babies. Our grandma taught us its notes. And now," she looked at Ethan, "our dad helps us keep it alive." Sophie began the chords of Amazing Grace on the piano. Abby joined in with the violin, and a new harmony that Ethan had helped create emerged, weaving together the beloved themes of their family. The foundation had already identified its first scholarship recipients, 2 sisters from a local shelter who showed a talent for the cello. Soon, more children would discover the transformative power of music, and more families would be touched by the magic that had changed the Parkers. The violin with the compass rose sang in Abby's hands, each note a fulfilled promise, each chord a bridge between past and future. And in that moment, Ethan was certain Mrs. Davies was smiling, proud of how her little family had found their way through the storm, guided by the music she loved so much. Because some fortunes can't be measured in dollars, some inheritances are passed along through musical notes, through unconditional love, through small compass roses that guide us to our true home. And as the last note resonated through the auditorium, Ethan knew this was not an ending. It was merely the first movement of a larger symphony, a symphony of love, hope, and redemption, played on the violin that had started it all.